up. For those of our viewers and our audience who are not familiar with your story, let's first start out with who you are and how you came to work for the Congressional Budget Office in the first place.
Well, prior to coming to the Congressional Budget Office, I was an adjunct professor at a university for a brief time, teaching graduate students in a graduate program the use of economics to examine policy. But I was still very interested in working on real-world issues, as about a dozen years ago, I had worked in a firm where I was exposed to different aspects of housing finance issues, from the regulatory side, from the policy side, on banking. All of these issues which have evolved to be at the center of the financial crisis in 2008. So following my teaching, I found myself at the Congressional Budget Office. At the Congressional Budget Office, I would be what they would call a senior staffer or a principal analyst, financial economist in the CBO's Financial Analysis Division.
Okay, and as a congressional senior staffer and financial economist there, your initial responsibilities, as I understand them, were to write a brief to Congress on the state of the foreclosure crisis and the alternative policy options in that crisis, as well as cover banking and housing. Now, when you presented this opinion to your supervisors, specifically the CBO chief economist and assistant director, Dr. Deborah Lucas, what was her response?
Well, when at the time that I was writing the foreclosure brief to Congress and also internal memos on the banking and mortgage sectors that would help to provide input into the macroeconomic forecast for the country, at that time the robo-signing foreclosure fraud issues emerged. And I wrote about that, and Dr. Lucas, the chief economist, told me that it was an issue of media sensationalism and discouraged me from writing about it. In response to what I wrote in the memo, she said that foreclosure fraud or robo-signing was an issue that we should take the lead on, that we should not be adding, or that we should be adding skepticism to the issue rather than add to the media hype. And that was the response for my writing about foreclosure fraud, and also a reason that was cited in my termination where the CBO felt that I had poor judgment in writing about issues related to robo-signing and what it meant for chain of title issues in mortgage securitization.
Now, as you said, this wasn't just a dispute with your boss. You didn't just disagree on the core issues here. You were fired. Why do you believe you were fired?
I believe I was fired because it was not only an issue of the robo-signing, but I also wrote about the banking sector and the mortgage markets, and all of these issues are inextricably linked and at the heart of the financial crisis in 2008. And there were other concerns raised about the banking sector, where there were issues about potential liquidity problems on top of the solvency issues that came out of the financial crisis in 2008, where she dismissed those concerns and reversed. Actually, she went through and changed my memos to reflect the views of the CBO that the banking sector was fine, the robo-signing was just a blip that would go away, and that we should not be concerned about it.
And now that blip that they believe will go away has resulted now, a few years later, in a $25 billion mortgage settlement about those very practices related to robo-signing. Do you see that settlement as a testament to the fact that what you were raising was the right issue to be raising?
Well, it's not just that I was raising it. These are issues that are that the state Supreme Courts are being confronted with. Currently, actually just recently, the Washington State Supreme Court, the Oregon State Supreme Court heard arguments on the validity of MERS to foreclose, and also it was an issue that required an act of Congress when the issue emerged, where Congress quickly passed the H.R. 3808 bill that would have made it more difficult for homeowners to challenge illegal foreclosures that were improperly done with forged documents, defective documents that were presented to the courts. And so the settlement, I'm not quite sure what it settled. I think that what it did not say spoke volumes about the issue rather than what was presented to the public with the settlement.
And I want to get more into that settlement as far as forward-looking, but first I want to back up because essentially you're saying that you were fired because the CBO didn't like your pessimistic points of view. I also should mention that in your personal story that you've written, you said you were told to include research, include analysis from Morgan Stanley, from Goldman Sachs, so big Wall Street banks that were advising the CBO. And at the heart of your criticism was something you just mentioned, something that I went over in my introduction called MERS, which stands for the Mortgage Electronic Registry System. Now, we gave a brief overview of this at the beginning of the show, but could you just expand upon why it is so important in your view to the subsequent crisis we saw in the mortgage market and the larger financial crisis? And I'm talking about MERS.
Well, MERS is another word for that. It's a title database that purports to have legal standing on over 65 million, I think it's over 70 million mortgages. And as the robo-signing issues emerged in the fall of 2010, there were also increasing legal challenges in the use of MERS in the banks and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's use of MERS to foreclose, because until then, or over the time that they founded MERS, all of these mortgages are recorded with MERS's name, and so they relied on the system in order to initiate foreclosures. And at least half a dozen states have invalidated the use or the legal standing of MERS to foreclose. And so we're looking at a little system that is very, that is not relatively unknown, that holds the title to over 65, 70 million mortgages, and the ramifications of the lack of legal standing for MERS has serious consequences for investors, for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are now backstopped by taxpayers, the exposures that the banks are exposed to in the mortgage-backed securities that they issued, and especially for investors as well, because if there is a break in the chain of title, because MERS now has lacked legal standing in several states, that what they may end up with in the $6.5 or $7 trillion in mortgage-backed securities that are out there, it suggests that perhaps these mortgage-backed securities may be unsecuritized or unsecured.
And Dr. Pham, a lot of implications here. MERS basically opened the door to the securitization, to these trillions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities that wreaked such havoc in the economy and to the financial system. So when we get back, we're going to talk more about that. We'll have more with Dr. Lan Pham, former principal analyst and financial economist at the CBO. We'll be back in just 1 minute. Stay right there.